We hear the name Baal. What comes to mind? For many, the word conjures images of fire, forbidden idols, angry prophets. It feels like a name straight from the pages of myth, a dark figure from a forgotten age. We picture him as the ultimate villain, the great rival to the God of the Hebrew Bible. This is the Baal of legend, defined by his enemies. A shadowy deity whose worshippers are condemned, whose altars are smashed, whose name becomes a byword for false and corrupt. Powerful, yes, but a caricature, flattened by centuries of conflict and debate. Dramatic, compelling, but only part of a much larger story. Myth, not history. The Baal of legend serves a purpose in passed-down narratives. He is the perfect antagonist. His cult represents temptations of a foreign culture, the allure of different gods, different ways of life. Stories of showdowns on mountaintops and the destruction of sacred places become powerful moral tales. Lessons about faith, loyalty, and the danger of straying. But focusing only on this version risks missing who Baal was to his own people. To understand Baal, we must step out of the shadow of myth. Look beyond condemnations and confrontations. Ask different questions. Who was Baal before he became a villain in someone else's story? What did he mean to millions across the ancient Near East for thousands of years? For them, not a demon or false god. A vital, powerful, often benevolent force. The god of the storm, bringing life-giving rains. Protector of sailors, guarantor of the harvest. A symbol of strength and kingship. The challenge, separate myth from history. Become detectives, sifting text, interpretation, and propaganda. The popular image is strong, ingrained in cultural memory, hard to see past. But to truly understand the ancient world, we must try. Question familiar narratives and listen for the fainter voices, the ones silenced for millennia. A journey from myth to history, from caricature to nuance, and a more fascinating reality. So why does any of this matter today? Why should we care about a long-dead cult and its forgotten god? The story of Baal is more than just an academic curiosity. It is a powerful case study in how history is written, and more importantly, by whom. The way Baal has been remembered shows how one group's beliefs can be redefined by another's victory. His cult was not a small, fringe movement. For a vast period, it was a major, widespread religion in the ancient world. Understanding its true nature helps us see the ancient Near East more accurately, a world far more diverse and interconnected than we imagine. We'll embark on a journey to uncover the historical Baal. We'll act as archaeologists of belief, digging through layers of time to find the real deity worshipped by the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, many others. We'll begin with Baal's origins, tracing his name and character to the earliest texts from cities like Ugarit. We'll explore the grand myths told about him, epic battles with sea monsters, his descent into the underworld. These stories reveal what his followers believed about the world and their place in it. They show a God who was dynamic and central in the cosmic drama of life, death, renewal. From myth, we'll move to material fact. We'll examine the physical evidence left by Baal's worshippers. Temples on high places, altars where offerings were made, symbols carved into stone and clay. We'll look at regional variation, how the cult adapted from the coast of modern-day Lebanon, the hills of ancient Israel. This evidence helps us reconstruct rituals and practices and what it meant to follow Baal. It moves us beyond rival texts into the world his followers built. Our approach will be neutral and evidence-based. We are not trying to prove one side right or wrong. Our goal is to understand the cult of Baal on its own terms, using the best archaeological and textual evidence. We'll address modern myths and conspiracy theories, separating verifiable facts from sensational fiction. All images and sources used will be free media to keep this knowledge accessible. Our aim is a clear, balanced, comprehensive account, stripping away myth to reveal the historical truth about Baal, his power, his people, his remarkable survival in human memory. Before we can meet the god, we must first understand his name. The word Baal seems very specific, like the personal name of a single deity. Yet, in the Semitic languages of the ancient world, it was not originally a name at all. It was a title. The root word simply means lord, master, owner. A man could be the Baal of a house, meaning he owned it. A husband could be the Baal of his wife, signifying his role as head of the family. This title was used widely across different cultures to denote authority and possession. It was a common term, woven into the fabric of everyday language, long before it became attached to the great storm god. Because Baal was a title, it could be applied to many different gods. In the early days, local communities might have their own Baal, their own specific lord or patron deity. The Baal of Tyre was not necessarily the same as the Baal of Sidon. This can be confusing. It is like trying to understand history if every king was simply called the king. This flexibility, however, was also a source of strength. It allowed the concept of a divine lord to adapt and merge with local traditions. Over time, one particular version of Baal, the powerful god of storm and fertility, rose to prominence until his title effectively became his name. When the Hebrew Bible speaks of the Baalim in the plural, it likely refers to many local lords or manifestations of Baal. The struggle of the Israelite prophets was not just against one single god named Baal. It was a struggle against a whole system of belief, a constellation of local deities who all held the title of Lord. They represented a different way of seeing the divine, one that was deeply rooted in the land and the cycle of the seasons. Understanding that Baal is a title first and a name second is the crucial first step in untangling the complex history of this ancient cult and the powerful god at its center. This linguistic key unlocks a more nuanced picture. It helps us see that the rise of Baal was not the sudden appearance of a new god. Instead, it was a long process of consolidation. Various local storm gods and fertility deities, who were the lords of their respective regions, gradually began to share attributes, myths, and titles. The powerful storm god Hadad, for instance, was often called Baal Hadad. Eventually, the title Baal became so strongly associated with this specific divine personality, the rider of the clouds who wields the thunderbolt, that it eclipsed all others. The local lords were absorbed into the persona of the great Lord of Heaven, the one we now simply call Baal. To find the true origins of Baal, we must travel back in time, long before the famous stories of the Hebrew Bible were written. Our journey takes us to the great Bronze Age civilizations of ancient Syria. In the dusty ruins of cities like Ebla and Mari, archaeologists have unearthed vast archives of clay tablets. These texts, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, give us our earliest glimpses of the gods who were worshipped in this region. Among the thousands of deities mentioned, we find figures who are the clear forerunners of the Baal we know. They are powerful storm gods, associated with rain, thunder, and the agricultural fertility that depended on them. In these very early texts, the most prominent storm god is not yet called Baal. He is known by other names, most commonly Adad or Hadad. This deity was revered across Mesopotamia and the Levant. He was the one who held the power of the storm, a force that could be both creative and destructive. The farmers who depended on winter rains to grow their crops would have prayed to him for sustenance. Rulers would invoke his name to bring legitimacy to their reign, associating their own power with the might of the thunderbolt. While the title Baal was occasionally used, Hadad was his proper name. He was the original divine warrior of the sky, the prototype from which Baal would later emerge as the dominant figure. The tablets from Ebla and Mari reveal a world where the pantheon of gods was complex and interconnected. Hadad did not exist in a vacuum. He was part of a large family of deities, each with their own domain and responsibilities. These early religious systems were not exclusive. People worshipped many gods for many different purposes. The storm god was crucial for agriculture, but one might also pray to a sun god, a moon goddess, or the great father god, El, who presided over the entire divine assembly. This context is vital. It shows that the foundations of Baal's cult were laid in a world of polytheism, where the idea of a single, all-powerful deity was not the prevailing norm. As we trace these whispers through the centuries, we see a gradual evolution. The name Hadad and the title Baal begin to be used more and more interchangeably. In some inscriptions, we find the composite name Baal Hadad, making the connection explicit. This fusion shows the growing importance of the lordship aspect of the storm god. He was not just one power among many. He was becoming the preeminent power, the active king of the gods who managed the world on a daily basis. The seeds of the great myths of Baal, his battles for supremacy, and his role as the guarantor of cosmic order, were all planted here in these ancient Syrian cities, thousands of years before they were written down in their most famous form. Among the most important texts discovered at Ugarit is a collection of poems known today as the Baal Cycle. This is not a single continuous book, but a series of related stories inscribed on multiple tablets that form a grand epic. The cycle tells the story of Baal's rise to become the king of the gods and the ruler of the cosmos. It is a dramatic saga filled with conflict, monumental battles, death, and resurrection. This narrative was likely the central myth of the Canaanite religion, recited at major religious festivals and forming the basis for the worship of Baal. It is our single most important source for understanding how his followers perceived him and the universe he governed. The story begins with the divine council, presided over by the ancient and wise father god, El. While El is the supreme authority, he is a distant, remote figure. The world needs an active, ruling king to manage its affairs. The Baal cycle is essentially the story of the struggle to determine who that king will be. It is a divine succession myth, a common theme in ancient Near Eastern religions. The narrative focuses on Baal's three main challenges on his path to power. First, he must defeat the fearsome god of the sea, Yam. Second, he must convince El to grant him permission to build his own palace, a symbol of his authority. And third, he must confront the terrifying god of death, Mot. This epic is more than just an exciting adventure story about the gods. It is a cosmic drama that explains the very nature of reality, as the Canaanites saw it. Each of Baal's adversaries represents a powerful and chaotic force of nature. Yam is the untamed, destructive power of the sea, a constant threat to the coastal cities of the Levant. Mot is the embodiment of death, sterility, and the barren drought of the summer months that kills all vegetation. Baal's victories are not just personal triumphs. They are the triumph of order over chaos, of life over death, and of fertility over barrenness. By defeating these forces, Baal establishes the stable, predictable cycle of the seasons upon which human life depends. The Baal cycle therefore served as a powerful religious and social charter. It explained why the world was the way it was. It told people that the life-giving winter rains were a gift from their divine champion, Baal, who had fought on their behalf. It explained the terrifying summer drought as a temporary victory for the god of death, a time when Baal was absent in the underworld. His eventual return in the autumn with the first thunderstorms was not just a meteorological event. It was a cosmic victory, a reenactment of his mythological triumph. The story gave meaning to the rhythms of their lives and, well, assured them that despite the forces of chaos, the divine Lord Baal was in control, forever defending the world of the living. The first great challenge Baal faces in his quest for kingship is his conflict with Yam. Yam is the personification of the chaotic and destructive power of the sea, often depicted as a fearsome sea monster or a seven-headed dragon named Litan. In the beginning, Yam sends messengers to the divine assembly, demanding the gods surrender Baal as a slave. The other gods are terrified. Even the great El seems ready to give in. Yam is shown as a primordial force of chaos, threatening to drag the world back into watery turmoil. Only Baal stands against him. The confrontation is a classic chaos camp, a heroic god versus a monstrous chaos. This theme appears across cultures. Babylonian Marduk versus Tiamat, Greek Zeus versus Typhon. In Ugarit, Baal is not alone. Kothar Wakasis, the divine craftsman, aids him, forging two magical clubs. The first, Yagrush, Chaser, strikes Yam but fails. The second, Ayamur, Driver, hits Yam on the head. Yam collapses, defeated. Baal is victorious and hailed as eternal king. After defeating Yam and building his magnificent palace, Baal's rule seems secure. However, a far more insidious enemy awaits him, Mot, the god of death. Mot is the personification of the underworld of sterility and of the scorching summer drought that brings all life to a standstill. Unlike the violent and blustering Yam, Mot is a quiet and insatiable force. His appetite is endless. His throat is the grave itself, swallowing everything that lives. He hears of Baal's power and glory, and filled with envy and hunger, sends a message to Baal inviting the storm god to a feast in his subterranean kingdom. This is no friendly invitation. It is a summons to surrender and be consumed. Terrified, Baal knows he cannot defeat Mot in a direct confrontation. The power of death is absolute. In a moment of despair, Baal submits. He descends into the underworld, the land of dust and decay, and is swallowed by Mot. With Baal gone, the world falls into chaos. The life-giving rains cease, the springs dry up, and the earth becomes barren and cracked. The gods mourn, and the supreme god El himself performs rites of grieving, covering himself in dust and lamenting the loss of the world's vitality. The absence of Baal is a catastrophe for gods and mortals alike. But the story does not end there. Baal's fierce and loyal sister, the warrior goddess Anat, refuses to accept his fate. She searches the world for him, her grief turning to rage. She confronts Mot, demanding he release her brother. When Mot boasts of having devoured Baal, Anat's fury is unleashed. She seizes the god of death, splits him with a sword, winnows him in a sieve, burns him in a fire, and grinds him with a millstone, scattering his remains across the fields. This brutal act is not just revenge. It is a ritual that symbolically breaks the power of death and drought, turning the destroyer into a source of life, like grain being prepared for planting. Following Mot's destruction, Baal is resurrected. He returns from the underworld, and with his return, the rains begin to fall again, and the earth becomes green and fertile once more. This part of the cycle is a powerful mythological explanation for the seasons in the Levant. Baal's time in the underworld corresponds to the dry summer months, while his return in the autumn heralds the start of the rainy season and the renewal of agricultural life. This death and resurrection motif placed Baal at the very center of the cycle of life. He was not just a powerful king, he was a dying and rising god whose personal drama was mirrored in the world every single year. Section 1. The Heart of the Cult. Offerings and Sacrifices. At the very heart of the worship of Baal was the practice of sacrifice. This was not simply a matter of giving something up. It was the primary way that the human world connected with the divine. Sacrifices were seen as a meal shared between the worshiper and the god, a fundamental act of communion and communication. Through the offering, a bond was forged. The smoke rising from the altar was believed to carry the essence of the gift to the divine realm, feeding and pleasing the gods. In return, the worshippers hoped to receive blessings, protection, and the continued favor of their powerful patron, Baal. It was a reciprocal relationship, a sacred transaction that maintained cosmic balance and social well-being. The types of offerings made to Baal were varied, reflecting his different roles as a god of fertility, storms, and kingship. Textual evidence from Ugarit and other sites lists numerous animal sacrifices, with sheep, goats, and especially young bulls being common. These animals represented life and vitality, and offering them was a way of giving back a portion of the community's wealth to the god who was its ultimate source. In addition to live animals, worshippers also presented offerings of grain, wine, olive oil, and bread. The act of sacrifice was a highly structured ritual. It was not a chaotic or haphazard event. Priests would officiate, following specific procedures laid out in religious texts. The remaining meat was often cooked and shared in a communal feast by the worshippers and the temple staff. This meal was a joyous and sacred occasion, a moment where the community came together to celebrate their shared identity and their collective bond with their divine protector, the great Lord Baal. It is impossible to discuss sacrifice in the context of Baal without addressing the most controversial and sensationalized aspect: the accusation of child sacrifice. This charge comes almost exclusively from Baal's rivals, particularly in the Hebrew Bible and later Roman accounts of Carthaginian religion. Archaeologically, the evidence is highly debated and ambiguous. While cemeteries containing the remains of infants have been found, scholars disagree on whether these represent sacrificial victims or children who died of natural causes and were buried in a sacred area. For the Canaanites of the Bronze Age, there is currently no clear, undisputed evidence that child sacrifice was a standard part of the cult of Baal, despite its prominent place in the popular imagination. The worship of Baal was not a constant, monotonous practice. It was punctuated by major festivals that marked the turning points of the year. These events were crucial to the religious and social life of the community. They were moments when the great myths, like the Baal cycle, were likely recited or reenacted, bringing the cosmic drama of the gods into the lives of the people. The most important festivals were tied directly to the agricultural cycle, which Baal himself was believed to control. The most significant festival likely took place in the autumn. This was a time of great anxiety and anticipation. The autumn festival was a grand appeal for Baal's return. The first thunderclaps of the season would not have been just a weather event. They would have been heard as a divine answer, the triumphant battle cry of Baal, newly risen from the dead and ready to restore life to the world. Once the rains began, the focus of worship would shift from petition to celebration. Spring festivals would have commemorated the full flowering of life that Baal's victory had secured. Another key type of festival was related to kingship, both divine and human. These celebrations would have also served to legitimize the power of the human king on earth. The earthly ruler was seen as the agent or representative of Baal. Well, the complex rituals and large temple complexes could not function on their own. They required a dedicated class of religious specialists, the priesthood. Not random volunteers, but trained and organized professionals, essential intermediaries between human and divine realms. Priests, custodians of sacred knowledge. At the top, the high priest, Rab Khanim, held immense authority, oversaw all religious activities. The temples built for Baal were not just simple shelters for an idol. They were conceived as the literal dwelling places of the god on earth. A worshipper would first enter an open courtyard. From the courtyard, a doorway would lead into the main temple building. A long hall, the cella. The hall led to the most sacred part, a small elevated room at the very back, the Holy of Holies, the innermost shrine, the throne room of the god. While grand city temples were the official centers of Baal's cult, much of the worship took place in a very different setting, on the tops of hills and mountains under the open sky. These sites are called Bamot, or high places. For the Canaanites, mountaintops were sacred. They felt closer to the heavens, the storm god's domain. Often beside it, standing stones, Massabat. Another common feature was the Asherah, a wooden pole or a living tree representing the goddess Asherah. For the average farmer or villager, the local high place was their main shrine. More accessible than the urban temple, biblical writers condemned these sites as idolatrous. Prophets urged them torn down and defiled. That opposition shows how popular and significant they were. They were powerful, ancient, numinous places in the religious landscape. They represented worship that was personal, local, and directly linked to nature's powers, those Baal embodied. Section 1. The Lord of Many Faces. Baal in Canaan and Syria. While the texts from Ugarit provide our most detailed portrait of Baal, it is crucial to remember that this was just one version of the god. In this vast area, the cult of Baal was not a monolithic entity. Instead, it was a tapestry of local traditions. In his Syrian heartland, Baal was often closely identified with the ancient storm god Hadad. Here, his character as a warrior god who brings the winter rains was paramount. As we move south into the land of Canaan, the region later Israel and Palestine, different cities had their own patron Baal. Baal Berith, Lord of the Covenant, worshipped at Shechem. This adaptability allowed the cult of Baal to sink deep roots throughout the region. He could be the specific lord of one's own town. He was both universally powerful and intimately local. Section 2. Rider of the Waves, the Baal of the Phoenicians. As a maritime people whose prosperity depended on trade and seafaring, their interpretation of the god naturally emphasized his dominion over the sea. The primary Baal of the great Phoenician city of Tyre was Melkart, king of the city. The Greeks, who traded extensively with the Phoenicians, identified Melkart with Heracles. As Phoenicians built a vast trading network across the Mediterranean, they carried the cult of Baal with them. Shrines and temples to Baal and Melkart are found in Cyprus and in Spain. The influence of Baal was not confined to his homeland in the Levant. During the New Kingdom period in Egypt, there was a significant influx of Canaanite culture and religion. Baal was officially incorporated into the Egyptian pantheon, where he was given a new and powerful role. In Egypt, Baal was primarily seen as a fierce and powerful warrior god. He was identified with the Egyptian god Set. This connection made Baal a suitable patron for the pharaoh as military commander. Inscriptions from the reign of Rameses, the great reference Baal. The Phoenician colonization of the Mediterranean led to the establishment of one of the most powerful and famous cities of antiquity, Carthage. At the head of the Carthaginian pantheon stood a god named Baal Hammon. He was often depicted as a mature, bearded man seated on a throne, a symbol of his supreme authority. His consort was the goddess Tanit, a powerful heavenly queen who was often invoked alongside him. The worship of Baal Hammon is notorious for one reason above all else: the accusation of systematic child sacrifice. Archaeologists in Carthage have excavated sacred burial grounds known as tophets, which contain thousands of urns filled with the cremated remains of infants and young animals. This discovery has fueled a long and heated debate among scholars. Some historians accept the ancient accounts. Others, however, are more skeptical. They argue that the literary sources are hostile propaganda from Carthage's rivals. The truth is likely complex and may never be fully known. Regardless, the association of Baal Hammon with child sacrifice has indelibly shaped his legacy, making him one of the most feared and reviled gods in Western memory. Well, sadly, that's how he's remembered. The version of Baal that has had the most profound and lasting impact on Western civilization is, without question, the one found in the pages of the Hebrew Bible. In the biblical narrative, Baal is not presented as a complex deity of storm and fertility. He is systematically stripped of any positive attributes and is transformed into the quintessential false god, the embodiment of idolatry. This portrayal was not designed to be fair. It was designed to be persuasive. His name, which means Lord or Master, is sometimes mockingly changed to Bosheth, a Hebrew word meaning shame. For example, the name of King Saul's son, Eshbaal, man of Baal, is rendered in some books as Ishbosheth, man of shame. This was a deliberate act of theological vandalism, turning a name of honor into an object of contempt. The prophets also portray Baal as impotent and unresponsive. In the Mount Carmel story, his priests cry out to him for hours, but there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Furthermore, the biblical writers associated the cult of Baal with the most heinous sins imaginable. His worship is linked not only with idolatry but also with sexual immorality, ritual prostitution, and, most damningly, child sacrifice. While the archaeological evidence for these practices being a standard part of Canaanite Baal worship is weak or ambiguous, the Bible presents them as defining features of his cult. By associating Baal with acts that were universally considered abhorrent, the authors could create a sense of moral disgust and ensure that their audience would reject him completely. Baal was not just wrong, he was evil. This relentless negative campaign was incredibly successful. As Judaism, Christianity, and Islam rose to prominence, their sacred texts became the primary lens through which the ancient world was viewed. The biblical portrait of Baal as a demonic idol completely eclipsed the historical memory of the god worshipped by the Canaanites and Phoenicians. This is the ultimate historical impact of the cult of Baal. His transformation from a great and powerful god in his own right into the archetypal villain in someone else's story, a shadow against which the light of monotheism could be defined. Our journey to uncover the truth about Baal has taken us from the dusty plains of ancient Syria to the coastal cities of Phoenicia and the fraught hills of ancient Israel. We began with a simple but crucial distinction: the difference between the Baal of myth and the Baal of history. The Baal of popular imagination, a demonic figure of fire and forbidden rites, is largely a caricature crafted by his enemies. This is the Baal of shadow, a villain created to serve a theological purpose. The texts show Baal as a heroic, dynamic young god, the rider of the clouds. He battles the sea god Yam and the god of death, Mot. His struggle, death, and resurrection explain the seasons and the balance of life and death. Perhaps the most pervasive of these is the idea that Baal was a single, monolithic deity, with a centralized, organized religion. As we have seen, this is incorrect. Another common misconception, fueled by hostile sources, is that the core practices of his cult were sexual depravity and child sacrifice. The archaeological evidence remains highly ambiguous and fiercely debated by scholars. For those wishing to explore the evidence for themselves, many excellent free media sources are available. By focusing on these verifiable sources, we can confidently separate fact from fiction. The historical truth is that Baal was a primary deity for millions of people for thousands of years. He was the divine embodiment of the storm, a symbol of strength and fertility, and the heroic protector of cosmic order. However, the rise of a new and radical idea, monotheism, would ultimately seal his fate. Baal, as the most prominent and appealing rival in the land, became the primary target. He was transformed from a great god into the archetypal false god, a demonic idol, a shadow against which a new light could define itself. Yet, the unearthing of cities like Ugarit has allowed for a historical resurrection. We can now see behind the caricature and recognize the powerful and complex deity who once captured the devotion of an entire civilization. The story of Baal, the ancient lord of storm and fertility, is therefore a tale of two lives. The first was his life as a god, a vibrant and powerful figure at the center of a major world religion. The second, and longer, is his afterlife as a myth, a villain, and a symbol. By tracing his path from the high places of Canaan to the pages of the Bible and into modern consciousness, we gain a deeper understanding not only of the ancient world, but of the very processes by which history, memory, and truth are constructed. The great Lord Baal may no longer have any worshippers, but his dramatic story, in all its complexity, continues to hold a powerful grip on our imagination.